Mark Sterling's jaw went slack. The woman commanding the attention of the entire lobby, flanked by executives who hung on her every word, was not just any CEO. It was the woman he had divorced and left with next to nothing. The struggling waitress he had openly mocked in a greasy diner not even a year ago. It was his ex-wife Eleanor. And as her gaze swept past him, her eyes as cold and distant as a winter sky, he felt a chilling premonition that his world was about to shatter. How did the woman he called an unambitious failure become the most powerful person in the room? Her story isn't just about revenge. It's about a spectacular rebirth that began in the ashes of a devastating betrayal. The smell of stale coffee and fried bacon clung to Eleanor Vance's clothes like a second skin. It was a scent she couldn't wash out no matter how hard she scrubbed. It was the perfume of her new life. At 1 a.m. after a grueling double shift at the 24-hour Starlight Diner, every bone in her body ached with a fatigue so deep it felt elemental. She trudged up the 3 flights of rickety stairs to her tiny one-bedroom apartment, the floral wallpaper peeling in damp curls near the ceiling. This was her world now. A world away from the polished hardwood floors and stainless steel appliances of the suburban home she had once shared with Mark Sterling. She had spent 15 years creating that home, curating a life that revolved entirely around his comfort and his career. She'd planned the dinner parties, schmoozed the wives of his colleagues, and put her own dreams on a dusty shelf labeled Someday. Her dream had been simple, a small charming bakery cafe filled with the scent of fresh bread and artisanal pastries. A dream Mark had always called quaint and unrealistic. "Ellie, be serious," he'd say, patting her hand with casual dismissal. "Your hobby is cute, but my career at Sterling & Finch is what pays the bills. Let's focus on what's real." What was real now was the divorce settlement. A pittance. Mark's lawyers had argued she hadn't contributed to his financial success, that her role as a homemaker was not a quantifiable asset. They painted her as a woman with no ambition content to live off his hard work. The judge, a stern-faced man who seemed to agree, had awarded Mark the house, the savings, and the investments. Eleanor got her car, a few $1,000s, and a court order to become self-sufficient. So here she was, self-sufficiently pouring coffee for truckers and refilling salt shakers. Her hands, once soft and nimble from kneading dough, were now rough and chapped with a perpetually raw spot on her thumb from carrying hot plates. The final, soul-crushing humiliation had come a week ago. The bell above the diner door had chimed, and in had walked Mark, looking every bit the successful financial analyst in a tailored suit. On his arm was Tiffany, a woman 10 years younger than Eleanor, with hair the color of spun gold, and a diamond on her finger that could probably pay Eleanor's rent for a decade. Eleanor's heart had hammered against her ribs. She'd wanted to melt through the linoleum floor to disappear into the steam rising from the coffee machine. But her co-worker was on break, and it was her section. She grabbed a menu plastered on a brittle smile and walked toward them. Mark's eyes widened in theatrical surprise, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well, look what we have here. Eleanor, working at the Starlight Diner. This is a bit of a step down from hosting my partners, isn't it?" Tiffany giggled, a high tinkling sound that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "Oh, Mark, be nice. She's trying." The words were meant to sound kind, but the condescending pity in her tone was worse than any insult. Eleanor's face burned, but she kept her voice steady. "Welcome to the Starlight. Can I get you started with some drinks? I'll have a sparkling water." "San Pellegrino, if you have it," Mark said, knowing full well they didn't. "And Tiffany will have—" "Oh, I don't know, honey. What do people drink in a place like this?" "A milkshake." Throughout their meal, Mark kept his voice loud, making pointed comments for the whole diner to hear. "Remember that trip to Tuscany, Ellie? A little different from this place, huh? And it's a shame your little baking hobby never took off. You could have at least been working somewhere decent." He was performing, showing his new prize, that he had upgraded, that he had left behind this pathetic, struggling woman for a better life. When it was time to pay, he placed a $100 bill on the table for a $30 check. As Eleanor approached to collect it, he looked her dead in the eye. "Keep the change," he said, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. Looks like you need it more than I do." Eleanor stood there clutching the bill as they walked out, Tiffany's laughter echoing behind them. The other patrons looked away, embarrassed for her. Her manager, a gruff but decent man named Sal, just shook his head. That night, Eleanor didn't just cry in her cramped apartment. She raged. She threw a chipped plate against the wall, the ceramic shattering like her last vestiges of hope. The mockery, the laughter, the pity, it was a poison that could either kill her or become the antidote. As she swept the broken pieces into a dustpan, something inside her shifted. The humiliation burned away the grief, leaving behind a hard, cold resolve. He thought she was a failure. He thought she was nothing without him. She would spend every last ounce of her energy proving him wrong, not for him, but for the woman she had forgotten she could be. The week following Mark's visit was a blur of simmering rage and grim determination. Every time she wiped down a sticky table or forced a smile for a rude customer, his mocking laughter echoed in her ears. It became her fuel. The pitying tip he'd left sat in an envelope on her kitchen counter, a constant, infuriating reminder. She refused to spend it on rent or bills. That money was tainted. It would be seed money. Eleanor started small. She woke up at 4 a.m., 2 hours before she had to prepare for her first shift at the diner. In her shoebox kitchen with its flickering overhead light and temperamental oven, she began to bake again. She started with what she knew, what she could afford. Simple, perfect chocolate chip cookies made with real butter and high-quality vanilla, a small splurge that made all the difference. She brought a batch to the diner for her co-workers. "Ellie, these are incredible." Chloe, a young waitress saving up for college, said, her eyes wide. "You could sell these." "Seriously, I'd buy a dozen right now." And so it began. She started taking orders. A dozen cookies here, a tray of brownies there. She baked birthday cupcakes for Sal's grandson. The word spread through the small community of diner regulars and staff. Soon she was barely sleeping, working her shifts, then coming home to bake until the early hours of the morning, her apartment finally smelling of sugar and vanilla instead of grease. The small profits were meticulously saved in a glass jar separate from the envelope containing Mark's $100. It was exhausting, back-breaking work, but for the first time in over a year, Eleanor felt a spark of her old self. This was something that was hers. No one could mock it or take it away. One Tuesday afternoon, after a particularly draining lunch rush, she came home to find a thick, cream-colored envelope in her mailbox. It looked official, important, and completely out of place among the usual junk mail and bills. The return address was for a law firm, Penhaligon & Sons Attorneys at Law, with an address in a prestigious downtown district. Her heart seized with a familiar dread. Was it from Mark's lawyers? Was there some new legal horror she had to face? Her hands trembled as she tore it open. The letter inside was printed on heavy watermarked paper. It was not from Mark's attorneys. It was a formal notice requesting her presence to discuss the estate of the late Genevieve Dubois. Eleanor frowned, the name ringing a very distant bell. Genevieve Dubois. She was her grandmother's sister, her great-aunt, a woman she'd never met who had moved to Paris before Eleanor was even born. Her family had lost touch decades ago. All Eleanor knew were vague family stories of a brilliant, eccentric woman who had cut ties with everyone to pursue a life abroad. She had assumed Genevieve had passed away years ago. According to the letter, Genevieve had recently died at the age of 92, and Eleanor Vance, as her closest living relative, was named the sole beneficiary of her estate. It had to be a mistake, a scam. Or maybe the estate was just a box of old photographs and a mountain of debt. People like her didn't get life-changing letters from mysterious law firms. That only happened in movies. She was a waitress at the Starlight Diner, smelling of bacon and despair. She read the letter 3 more times, her skepticism warring with a tiny, flickering flame of curiosity. The lawyer who signed it, Arthur Penhaligon, had included his direct line. Cautiously, heart-thumping, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. A calm, elderly voice answered on the second ring. "Arthur Penhaligon speaking." Hello? Eleanor stammered. My name is Eleanor Vance. I received a letter from you regarding a Genevieve Dubois. Miss Vance. Yes, I've been expecting your call, the voice said, warm and professional. My father handled your great-aunt's affairs for many years, and I took over the practice. She was quite a remarkable woman. I understand this must come as a shock. Could you perhaps come into the office this week? There are a number of things to discuss regarding your inheritance. Inheritance. The word hung in the air, foreign and unbelievable. Eleanor looked around her tiny drab apartment at the jar of cookie money on the counter and the envelope with Mark's $100 inside. A glimmer of hope so faint she was almost afraid to acknowledge it began to push through the fog of her exhaustion. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. Yes, she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Yes, I can be there. The offices of Penhaligon & Sons were a world away from the Starlight Diner. Located on the 40th floor of a gleaming skyscraper, the reception area was a study in understated elegance, dark mahogany walls, plush leather chairs, and a hushed atmosphere that spoke of old money and quiet power. Eleanor felt intensely out of place in her best but still cheap black pants and a simple blouse. She clutched her worn purse, her knuckles white. Arthur Penhaligon was exactly as his voice had suggested, a man in his late 60s with a kind, wrinkled face, sharp blue eyes, and a perfectly tailored gray suit. He greeted her with a gentle smile and led her into a large corner office with a breathtaking view of the city. Ms. Vance, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for her to sit. Please call me Arthur. I feel as though I know a part of your family through Genevieve's stories over the years. I'm sorry to say I never knew her, Eleanor admitted, feeling a pang of regret. She was formidable, Arthur said, with a fond chuckle. Brilliant, independent, and she did things her own way. She never married, never had children. She poured all of her passion into her work. Eleanor leaned forward. Her work, I was always told she just lived in Paris. Oh, she did much more than that, Arthur corrected. Genevieve was a trained chemist, a rarity for a woman of her generation. But her true passion was combining her scientific knowledge with the art of patisserie. She owned a small but legendary bakery in Le Marais for over 50 years. He slid a thick file across the polished desk. Now to the matter of the inheritance. Genevieve was not an extravagant woman, but she was prudent. She has left you no great fortune, I'm afraid. No millions in the bank. Eleanor's tiny flame of hope flickered. Of course. It was too good to be true. However, Arthur continued, a twinkle in his eye, she has left you something she considered far more valuable. First, there is a small trust fund. After taxes and fees, it amounts to roughly $50,000. It was earmarked for a specific purpose. $50,000. To Eleanor, who was counting tips to make rent, it was a fortune. She felt a wave of dizziness. The second part of the inheritance is a property she purchased here in the city decades ago as an investment. It's a small commercial storefront in the old historic district. It has been vacant for years. He pushed a large old-fashioned key across the desk. She left specific instructions with the trust. The money is to be used to renovate that property and turn it into a bakery. Eleanor stared at the key, her breath catching in her throat. A bakery. Her bakery. It was the exact dream Mark had ridiculed for years. It felt like a sign, a ghostly hand reaching across time to offer her the one thing she'd always wanted. There is one more thing, Arthur said, his voice lowering slightly. He stood and walked over to a large safe concealed behind a painting. He returned with a beautiful antique leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with the initials G.D. This, he said, placing it gently in her hands, is what she called her life's work. She instructed me to tell you that the money and the building are just the vessel. This is the true inheritance. That evening, Eleanor let herself into the inherited property. It was just as Arthur had described, small, dusty, and neglected, with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. But it had good bones. High ceilings, exposed brick walls, and a large front window perfect for displaying pastries. Standing in the center of the empty room, she felt a profound sense of possibility. Back in her apartment, she finally opened the leather journal. The pages were filled with her great-aunt's elegant, spidery script. It was a recipe book, but like none she had ever seen. Alongside recipes for croissants and macarons were complex chemical formulas and scientific notations. Genevieve hadn't just been baking, she had been engineering. Tucked into a hidden pocket in the back cover was a sealed envelope. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, was what Genevieve had titled the Elysian Formula. It was the culmination of her life's work, a recipe for a foundational pastry dough that, through a unique combination of a rare orchid extract and a precise multi-stage temperature-controlled fermentation process, achieved the impossible. It created pastries with an otherworldly flavor, a sublime texture, and most remarkably a shelf life of over a week without any artificial preservatives, while still tasting as if they had just come out of the oven. Genevieve had documented her decades of trial and error, the science behind the molecular gastronomy she had perfected in secret. This wasn't just a recipe, it was a revolutionary, patentable process. It was a goldmine. Eleanor sat on her lumpy couch, the journal open in her lap, and she finally understood. Her great-aunt hadn't just left her a bakery. She had left her a key to a future Eleanor couldn't have dared to imagine. She looked over at the envelope with Mark's $100. With a steady hand, she picked it up, walked to the kitchen, and ceremoniously tore it into tiny pieces, dropping them in the trash. She didn't need his pity money anymore. She had a legacy. The next 2 months were a whirlwind of focused, relentless work. Eleanor quit her job at the diner on the spot. When she told Sal, he clapped her on the back and wished her well. It was Chloe who was most excited. "You're kidding me, a whole bakery!" Chloe's eyes sparkled. "Ellie, that's amazing. If you need any help, seriously, I'll work for free just to be around that smell." Eleanor smiled. "I can't pay you much to start, but how would you like to be my first employee?" Chloe's shriek of joy was her first real investment. With the $50,000 trust, Eleanor hired a small crew of contractors to bring the dilapidated storefront back to life. She was there every day, covered in plaster dust and paint, making decisions on everything from the color of the tiles to the type of oven. She wanted the space to be warm, inviting, and elegant, a tribute to the mysterious great-aunt she was coming to know through the pages of her journal. She named it Genevieve's Pantry. While the renovations were underway, Eleanor spent her nights in her apartment kitchen, which now felt more like a laboratory. She meticulously followed Genevieve's complex instructions for the Elysian Formula. The first few attempts were failures. The temperature had to be exact, the measurements precise to the microgram. But Eleanor, with her innate baker's intuition and a newfound scientific rigor, persevered. On the 4th try, she succeeded. She baked a simple batch of croissants using the formula. When she pulled them from the oven, they were visually perfect golden brown with delicate flaky layers. But the moment she tasted one, she knew. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The flavor was impossibly rich and buttery, yet light as air. It melted on her tongue, leaving a subtle floral aftertaste from the orchid extract. It was, in a word, sublime. The grand opening of Genevieve's Pantry was on a crisp Saturday in October. Eleanor and Chloe had been up all night baking. The front window was filled with an exquisite array of pastries, all derived from the Elysian Formula croissants, pain au chocolat, delicate fruit tarts, and a signature creation Eleanor called the Elysian Knot, a braided pastry with a hint of cardamom and orange zest. She had only expected a small crowd of neighbors and friends. By 9 a.m. there was a line stretching down the block. The word of mouth had been more powerful than any advertising. The aroma wafting from the bakery was an irresistible siren call. They sold out of everything by noon. The next day the line was even longer. Within a month, Genevieve's Pantry was the talk of the town. People drove from neighboring states to try the pastries that defied description. Local food bloggers wrote breathless reviews. But the real turning point came on a dreary Tuesday morning. A well-dressed, unassuming man came in, ordered an Elysian Knot and a black coffee, and sat at a small table for nearly an hour writing in a small notebook. Eleanor was too busy to pay him much mind. The following Sunday she received a call from Arthur Penhaligon. "Eleanor, my dear, are you sitting down?" he asked, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Do you happen to read the New York Times?" The man had been Alistair Finch, the newspaper's notoriously hard-to-please food critic. His review published that morning was a rhapsody. He called Genevieve's Pantry a revolutionary act in the art of baking and described the Elysian knot as a bite of pure, unadulterated bliss. He speculated on the secret, marveling at how the pastries retained their fresh-from-the-oven perfection for days. He ended the piece by calling Eleanor Vance the most exciting new talent in the culinary world. The story didn't just go viral, it exploded. The phone rang off the hook. National news programs wanted to do features. Food distribution companies wanted to talk about partnerships. Eleanor's small neighborhood bakery was suddenly on the national stage. She was overwhelmed, terrified, and more thrilled than she had ever been in her life. Standing in the middle of her bustling shop, the air thick with the sweet scent of success. She thought of Mark's condescending smirk in the diner. She wished he could see her now. Little did she know he soon would. The New York Times review transformed Eleanor's life overnight. The quiet success of her local bakery became a national phenomenon. Her little shop was now a landmark with a permanent line of customers snaking around the corner from open to close. The demand was insatiable and far outstripped what her small kitchen could produce. She was drowning in her own success, fielding calls from investors, distributors, and potential franchisees, all while trying to manage the day-to-day operations. It was Arthur Penhaligon who helped her navigate the treacherous new waters. He vetted the flood of offers, protecting her from predatory deals and helping her file the necessary patents for the Elysian formula, safeguarding Genevieve's secret. "You are sitting on a potential empire, Eleanor," he told her during one of their many meetings. "But we must be smart. The right partner will see your vision, not just the dollar signs." The right partner found her. A call was scheduled with Isabella Rossi, the formidable CEO of Summit Ventures, a top-tier venture capital firm known for launching boutique brands into global powerhouses. Isabella wasn't just an investor. She was a brand builder. Their first meeting took place at the bakery after hours. Isabella, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 40s with an air of quiet authority, didn't start by talking numbers. She started by tasting. She sampled an Elysian knot in reverent silence, her eyes closing as she savored the flavor. "Mr. Finch did not exaggerate," she said, her voice a low hum of appreciation. "This is not just a pastry, Ms. Vance. This is an experience. This is a luxury product." For 2 hours they talked. Isabella had done her homework. She understood the science behind the formula, the potential for a line of high-end packaged baked goods that could dominate the gourmet market. Her vision was bigger than Eleanor had ever dared to dream. Genevieve's Pantry products in every upscale grocery store, airport lounge, and luxury hotel in the country and eventually the world. "Most firms would offer you a buyout," Isabella said, her gaze direct and unflinching. "They would take your formula, give you a check, and show you the door. That's not how I operate. A brand needs a soul, a story. You are the story, Eleanor. I'm not offering to buy you out. I'm offering to make you CEO." The proposal was staggering. Summit Ventures would provide the capital, tens of millions of dollars, to build state-of-the-art production facilities, a distribution network, and a massive marketing campaign. In return, they would take a 49% stake in the newly formed Genevieve's Pantry, Inc. Eleanor would retain a 51% majority share, full creative control, and the title of Chief Executive Officer. She was being handed the keys to an empire built on her great-aunt's legacy and her own hard work. The scared, defeated waitress from the Starlight Diner felt like a distant memory, a character from someone else's sad story. She looked at Isabella, a woman who radiated a power and confidence Eleanor was just beginning to find in herself, and saw not a predator, but a partner. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice clear and steady. Let's do it. The next 6 months moved at lightning speed. With the backing of Summit Ventures, Genevieve's Pantry, Inc. was officially launched. Eleanor, guided by Isabella's mentorship, grew into her role as CEO with astonishing speed. She was a natural leader with an intuitive understanding of the product and a fierce dedication to maintaining its quality. She hired the best people, including a grateful Chloe, who was promoted to head of quality control for the entire operation. The launch of their packaged product line was a resounding success. Within months, the elegant boxes of Genevieve's Pantry products were flying off the shelves of stores like Whole Foods and Dean and DeLuca. The company's valuation soared. First it was $10 million, then $50, then over $100 million. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had been struggling to pay her rent less than a year ago, was now a multi-millionaire CEO, the toast of the business world, and the face of America's newest food craze. She had stepped into a new life, a new identity forged in the heat of her own oven and the fire of her own resolve. While Eleanor's star ascended, Mark Sterling's world was quietly beginning to crumble. The financial industry was contracting, and his firm Sterling & Finch announced a round of brutal layoffs. Mark, whose performance had been slipping for months, survived the first cut, but was placed on a strict performance improvement plan. The pressure was immense. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was eroding into a brittle arrogance that grated on his clients and superiors. His home life offered no refuge. Tiffany, who had married him for the lifestyle he promised, was becoming increasingly demanding as she sensed his financial instability. Her spending was reckless, a desperate attempt to maintain the facade of wealth for her social media followers. Their conversations were no longer about shared dreams, but about overdue credit card bills and her complaints that he wasn't taking her to the right places anymore. The glamour had faded, revealing the shallow foundation of their relationship. Mark started hearing whispers about a new gourmet brand called Genevieve's Pantry. He'd seen the products in stores, noting the high price point with a cynical sneer. He'd even heard colleagues rave about the miracle pastries. He dismissed it as another fleeting trend for the wealthy, never once making a connection to the quaint hobby of the woman he had discarded. The name Vance was common enough, and he couldn't imagine his Eleanor, meek, unambitious Eleanor, being capable of such a thing. His breaking point came when he lost his biggest client due to a careless mistake. It was the final nail in the coffin. He was fired. The severance package was modest, and with their mountain of debt, it wouldn't last long. Panic began to set in. He spent weeks scrambling calling contacts trying to land a new position, but his reputation had been tarnished. He was damaged goods. His last desperate hope was a meeting he'd managed to secure with an executive at Summit Ventures. It wasn't for a job, but to pitch a risky investment scheme, hoping to earn a commission that could keep them afloat. On the day of the meeting, he put on his best suit, the fabric now feeling a little tight, the confidence it once gave him completely gone. He walked into the soaring glass and steel lobby of the Summit Ventures Tower, feeling small and insignificant. He checked in with the receptionist and sat down nervously, rehearsing his pitch. A few minutes later, the main elevator bank chimed and the doors slid open. A group of people emerged, walking with purpose. At the center of the group, leading the discussion, was a woman. She was wearing a chic tailored navy blue dress that radiated power. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she moved with a grace and assurance that commanded the attention of everyone in the lobby. Mark's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. The face was familiar, but the context was all wrong. The poise, the confidence, the aura of absolute authority, it couldn't be. But it was. It was Eleanor. He stood up, his legs feeling weak. "Ellie," he said, his voice a disbelieving croak. The group paused. Eleanor's head turned, and her eyes, cool and appraising, landed on him. There was a flicker of recognition, nothing more. It was the look one might give a half-forgotten person from a distant past. She didn't look shocked or angry. She looked indifferent. "Mark," she said, her voice even and devoid of any emotion. It was the same voice she might use to address a caterer or a junior assistant. He took a step forward, a desperate, sycophantic smile forming on his face. "Ellie, my God. What are you doing here? You look incredible." Isabella Rossi, standing beside Eleanor, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Eleanor, do you know this man?" Before Eleanor could answer, Mark blurted out, "Know her? I'm her ex-husband. We were married for 15 years. I always knew she had talent. I always encouraged her." The lie was so bald-faced, so pathetic it hung in the air between them. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. She looked through him, her eyes holding a placid coldness that was more devastating than any rage could ever be. "I have a board meeting to get to," she said, not to him but to Isabella. She then turned her head slightly back toward Mark. "It was interesting seeing you again, Mark. I hope everything is well." The dismissal was absolute. With a slight nod, she turned and continued walking toward the secure access gates, her team falling into step around her. She never looked back. Mark Sterling stood frozen in the middle of the lobby, the blood draining from his face. He was no longer the successful husband pitying his struggling ex-wife. He was a fired, desperate man, begging for scraps in the lobby of her empire. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. In that moment, watching the woman he had called a failure walk away without a second glance, he understood the true meaning of being left with nothing. The lobby of Summit Ventures felt like a tomb. The hushed efficiency of the space seemed to mock Mark's stunned silence. The receptionist called his name, telling him his meeting was ready, but he couldn't move. The image of Eleanor, poised, powerful, and utterly indifferent, was seared into his mind. The pitch he had so carefully prepared now seemed ridiculous, the desperate gambit of a failed man. He turned and walked out of the building, his humiliation a heavy cloak. His downfall accelerated. When Tiffany learned he had been fired and saw their savings dwindling, she left. There was no dramatic fight, just a cold, transactional departure. She packed her designer bags, called a car, and moved in with a wealthier, older man she'd been cultivating on the side. She left him with a mountain of shared debt and a starkly empty house filled with things he could no longer afford. In a last pathetic attempt to claw something back, Mark hired a lawyer and tried to sue Eleanor. He claimed that the initial idea for a bakery was a shared marital concept, and that he was entitled to half the profits of Genevieve's Pantry, Inc. The case was so flimsy it was almost laughable. Arthur Penhaligon's firm countered with a swift, brutal efficiency, presenting the timeline of their divorce, Mark's minimal settlement, and sworn affidavits from diner employees including Sal and Chloe, detailing his public mockery of Eleanor's struggles. The judge threw the case out in a single hearing, ordering Mark to pay Eleanor's legal fees. It was the final humiliating blow. Within a year, Mark had lost the house to foreclosure and was living in a small rented room, working a low-level sales job that he hated. The tailored suits were replaced by off-the-rack polyester. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the quiet bitterness of a man haunted by his own colossal misjudgment. He would sometimes see Eleanor's face on the cover of business magazines at the grocery store checkout Forbes Fortune Fast Company. She was celebrated as a visionary, a leader, a testament to resilience. Each image was a fresh twist of the knife, a reminder of the life and the woman he had so carelessly thrown away. Eleanor, however, rarely thought of Mark at all. Her life was full, her days consumed with purpose. She was not just a CEO, she was a creator. She expanded the company, launching the Genevieve Foundation, a charitable organization that provided grants and mentorship to women starting their own small businesses. She remembered her own feelings of hopelessness and was determined to offer other women the hand-up she had received from a long-lost aunt. Chloe remained by her side not just as an employee but as a trusted friend and executive. They had built the company together, and their bond was forged in the shared memory of wiping diner tables and dreaming of something more. One evening, Eleanor stood in her penthouse office, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. It was a view she had earned. On her desk was not a pastry, but a framed photograph she had found in her great-aunt's belongings. It was a picture of a young, smiling Geneviève Dubois, standing proudly in front of her small Parisian bakery, her eyes sparkling with intelligence and passion. Eleanor felt a deep, abiding connection to the woman she had never met. Geneviève had given her more than a recipe. She had given her a blueprint for a new life. A life defined not by a man, but by her own strength, talent, and will. The laughter and scorn of her ex-husband had once been the soundtrack to her failure. Now it was a forgotten whisper drowned out by the sweet, satisfying hum of her own success. She was no longer Mark's ex-wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Genevieve's Pantry, a woman who had found her fortune not overnight, but over a lifetime of waiting for the right moment to claim it. And as she looked out at the endless city, she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning. 2 years into her tenure as CEO, Eleanor had settled into a rhythm of success. Genevieve's Pantry Inc. was no longer a startup. It was a titan of the gourmet food industry, a publicly traded company with a valuation that had surpassed even Isabella Rossi's most optimistic projections. Eleanor had proven to be as shrewd in the boardroom as she was intuitive in the kitchen. She had expanded the product line, opened flagship stores in London, Tokyo, and Paris, and had been featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The Unlikely CEO, Who Built a Billion-Dollar Empire on a Whisper of a Recipe." She was respected, admired, and in complete control. She thought she had faced every possible challenge. Then the call came. It was from her head of supply chain, a logistical genius named David Chen. His voice, usually a calm and steady baritone, was tight with anxiety. "Eleanor, we have a problem. A big one," he said, skipping all pleasantries. "The orchid. The shipment from our supplier in Madagascar is being held indefinitely. There's been a political coup in the region. All exports have been frozen, and we have no idea when or if they will resume." Eleanor felt a cold dread spread through her chest. The Masdevallia evansii, the rare orchid whose extract was the cornerstone of the Elysian formula, grew only in one specific microclimate in a remote valley in northern Madagascar. Geneviève had established a relationship with a single family-run farm there. 50 years ago, a relationship Eleanor's company had maintained. They had a 3-month supply in reserve. After that, production of every single product they made would have to stop. The news hit the executive board like a physical blow. Their entire empire was balanced on the petal of a single fragile flower. The company's stock analysts projected that if news of the supply crisis leaked, their share price would collapse. The board's immediate reaction was one of panic. "We have to find a substitute," one member urged. "Our R&D department can synthesize a similar flavor profile. We can rebrand slightly. The market will adapt." "Absolutely not." Eleanor stated, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. Her response was instant and visceral. To replace the orchid would be to gut the soul of the company. The Elysian formula was not just about a flavor profile. It was about the unique molecular reaction created by that specific natural extract. A synthetic compound wouldn't just be a lie, it wouldn't work. "We are not compromising the integrity of Genevieve's formula. Not now, not ever." Isabella Rossi watched her expression unreadable. "Then what do you propose, Eleanor?" "We are facing a catastrophic failure. Principle is a fine thing, but it doesn't keep a company solvent." "Give me 1 week," Eleanor said. Geneviève was a scientist. She would have anticipated this. She must have had a contingency plan. For the next 3 days, Eleanor barely slept. She locked herself in her office with her great-aunt's original leather-bound journal, the one Arthur Penhaligon had given her. She had read the main recipes countless times, but now she scoured the margins, the appendices, the pages filled with dense chemical notations she had previously skimmed over. She was looking for a ghost, a hint of a solution from the woman who had started it all. Late on the 3rd night she found it. Tucked into a section on botanical genetics was a cryptic entry. It spoke of a sister orchid, a hybrid she had been developing. "Masdevallia evansi is a temperamental muse," Geneviève had written, But her cultivated sister Eleonora's dream is a sturdier soul. Requires the cool, thin air of the alpine peaks to flower a secret kept safe by the mountain's chill. Below the entry was a complex diagram of a geothermal heating system and a set of geographical coordinates. Not for Madagascar, but for a remote high-altitude region in the Swiss Alps. Eleanor's heart pounded. A contingency plan. Genevieve hadn't just predicted a potential failure. She had spent years secretly cultivating an alternative. A backup orchid which she had touchingly named after the great niece she had never met. Within hours, Eleanor was on a private jet to Zurich, accompanied only by her head of botany. From there they took a helicopter high into the snow-capped mountains, landing in a secluded valley that was inaccessible by road. Following the coordinates, they founded a series of unassuming semi-subterranean greenhouses seamlessly built into the mountainside and powered by a geothermal vent. Inside was a botanical wonderland. Thousands of orchids identical in appearance to their Madagascan cousins bloomed in the carefully controlled environment. This was Genevieve's secret garden, her failsafe. A project she had funded for decades through a discreet Swiss trust, ensuring her legacy could survive any disaster. Eleanor walked through the humid air, touching a delicate petal of the orchid named for her. It was a message across time, a testament to her great-aunt's incredible foresight and genius. She was not just a baker. She was a visionary who had planned for every eventuality. In that moment, Eleanor realized her role was not just to run the company Genevieve's recipe had spawned, but to be the new guardian of that vision. She returned to New York not just with a solution, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She presented her findings to the board, along with a plan to acquire the Swiss facility and begin large-scale cultivation. They were stunned into silence, then erupted in applause. Isabella Rossi looked at her with a new level of respect. Eleanor had not just averted a crisis. She had single-handedly secured the future of the company for generations to come, proving that she was more than a figurehead. She was the true heir to Genevieve's legacy in spirit as much as in blood. 5 more years passed. Genevieve's Pantry became a global institution, a multi-billion-dollar behemoth synonymous with quality and luxury. Eleanor herself had become an icon not just for her business acumen, but for her philanthropy through the Genevieve Foundation. She was a fixture on lists of the world's most powerful women, yet she retained a humility and grace that seemed at odds with her staggering success. The wounds of her past had long since healed into faint scars, reminders of a journey that felt like a lifetime ago. She was happy, fulfilled, and rarely, if ever, gave Mark Sterling a second thought. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor found herself in her old neighborhood. Her foundation was funding the renovation of a local community center, and she had spent the morning meeting with the project managers. As her driver was navigating the familiar streets, she saw it on the corner, the Starlight Diner. It looked exactly the same. The faded sign, the large plate glass windows, the promise of coffee and comfort within. On a sudden, inexplicable whim, she leaned forward. "James, could you pull over here, please?" she asked her driver. "I'll only be a moment." Leaving her driver and the sleek town car behind, she walked towards the diner. The little bell above the door chimed the same sound that had once signaled the start of another grueling shift. The smell was the same too, bacon coffee, a hint of bleach. A few patrons sat at the counter and a young couple shared a milkshake in a booth. It was like stepping into a time capsule. She slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl cracked in the same places she remembered. A waiter emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was older now, his shoulders slumped with a permanent weariness. His hair was thinning and his face was puffy and lined with a map of disappointments. He walked toward her, pulling a small notepad from his pocket, his eyes fixed on it. "Be right with you, ma'am." He mumbled, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. When he finally looked up, his eyes met hers. The notepad slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the floor. His face went pale, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a profound, soul-deep shame. It was Mark. Eleanor felt nothing. No anger, no surge of triumph, no satisfaction. The man standing before her was a ghost, a hollowed-out echo of the arrogant Titan who had once held her entire world in his hands. He was just a tired, middle-aged waiter in a greasy spoon diner. The circle was complete, the irony so thick it was almost suffocating. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking. He bent down to retrieve his notepad, his movements clumsy. I didn't know." "It's all right," she said, her voice soft and even. She felt a strange, detached pity for him. He was a prisoner of the past while she had built a new world for herself. He fumbled with his pen, unable to meet her gaze. What can I get for you?" "Just a black coffee, please," she said gently. He scurried away, his hands trembling as he poured the coffee. He brought it back and set it on the table, sloshing some into the saucer. He mumbled an apology and retreated behind the counter, trying to look busy, his back turned to her. Eleanor took a slow sip of the coffee. It tasted exactly as she remembered. She didn't stay long. She had a flight to catch for a meeting in London. Her world was vast and full of exciting challenges. This place was just a single faded photograph from a life that no longer belonged to her. She stood to leave, opening her purse. She pulled out a crisp, new $100 bill and placed it on the table. It was the exact amount he had once thrown at her as an insult. But her gesture was different. It wasn't pity, it wasn't a taunt. It was an act of closure, an acknowledgement of the journey's start and its end. It was her finally and completely paying her own way out of their shared history. She walked to the door without looking back. As the bell chimed her exit, she took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. She was not leaving in anger or triumph. She was just leaving. She got into her car, leaving the ghost of Mark Sterling to his ghosts, and drove away toward her limitless future, finally and completely free. Eleanor's incredible journey proves that the end of one chapter is often the disguised beginning of a far greater story. She transformed the painful ashes of betrayal and mockery into the foundations of an empire, reminding us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest struggles. Her success wasn't just in becoming a millionaire CEO. It was in rediscovering the powerful, capable woman who was there all along, waiting for her chance to shine. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that the best revenge is not anger, but a life lived beautifully and successfully on your own terms. What did you think of Mark's ultimate karma and Eleanor's spectacular rise? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by this incredible story of resilience, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of triumph. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What would you do if the man you gave up everything for, your dreams, your career, your youth, left you for a younger model, and then had the audacity to flaunt her in your face at the most public event of the year? For Amelia Hayes, this wasn't a nightmare. It was her reality. She stood there, a ghost in a borrowed dress, watching her ex-husband Julian Vance parade his new bride like a trophy. She felt the world shrinking, the whispers of the elite cutting deeper than any knife. But what no one in that glittering ballroom knew, least of all Julian, was that a single letter sitting unopened on her modest coffee table was about to change everything. Her humiliation was about to become his greatest regret. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Astoria Ballroom dripped light onto the city's elite, a constellation of wealth and power. For Amelia Hayes, the light felt interrogating, exposing the frayed hem of her confidence. 2 years post-divorce, she was here on a charity ticket, a courtesy from a friend who thought it would be good for her to get out. In reality, it felt like a cruel diorama of the life that had been stolen from her. She was nursing a glass of sparkling water, trying to look absorbed in the silent auction bids, when a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The cameras at the entrance flashed in a frenzy, a supernova of light heralding the arrival of a new king and queen. Julian Vance, her ex-husband, stepped onto the marble floor. He was more handsome than she remembered his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit clinging to a frame honed by personal trainers she used to schedule. He oozed the kind of success she had helped build brick by painful brick. And on his arm, dripping in diamonds that Amelia knew were paid for by the company she co-founded, was Tiffany Dubois. Tiffany was barely 24, a lifetime away from Amelia's 40. She was a sunrise, all golden skin and effortless grace, her laughter tinkling like the champagne flutes around them. She wore a crimson gown that left little to the imagination, a stark contrast to Amelia's elegant but understated navy blue dress. They were the picture of modern success, the tech mogul and his influencer bride. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. She had known this might happen, but the reality was a physical blow. She remembered the nights she'd spent editing Julian's business proposals until her eyes burned the savings she'd poured into his first startup, the dreams of being a renowned architectural restorer she'd put on hold to be Mrs. Vance. He had promised her it was a partnership. "We're a team, Ames," he used to say. "When I win, you win." But when he won, he cashed her out for a newer model. The divorce had been brutal. Julian's lawyers painted her as a freeloader, a bitter woman clinging to a lifestyle she hadn't earned. She walked away with a pittance, just enough to rent a small apartment and restart her restoration consultancy on a shoestring budget, while he kept the penthouse, the company, and their entire history. Now he was working the room Tiffany attached to his side like a charm. He caught Amelia's eye across the crowd. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of shared history. Just a cold, dismissive glance, before he turned back to laugh at something Tiffany whispered in his ear. He then did something that shattered the last of Amelia's composure. He took Tiffany's hand, raised it to his lips, and kissed her diamond-encrusted fingers, his eyes still locked on Amelia's. It was a deliberate act of cruelty. A public declaration. "You are nothing. This is my victory." The whispers started subtle but sharp. "Is that Amelia Hayes, Julian's ex? God, she looks so tired. You can't compete with youth, can you?" Amelia's face burned. She wanted to dissolve into the floorboards. She turned to make a quiet exit, but her path was blocked by Beatrice Albright, a society matron whose tongue was as sharp as her diamond earrings. "Amelia, darling," Beatrice purred, her eyes flicking between Amelia and the golden couple. "How brave of you to come. Julian and Tiffany are simply radiant, aren't they? He looks so unburdened." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart. Unburdened. That's what she was to him now, a burden he had shed. Amelia forced a tight-lipped smile. "Beatrice, they do look happy." She could feel her voice trembling. She had to get out. She excused herself, her heart hammering against her ribs, and fled towards the exit, not daring to look back. The sound of their tinkling laughter seemed to follow her all the way out into the cold, unforgiving night. Back in her small, quiet apartment, the borrowed dress felt like a costume for a life she no longer lived. She sank onto her sofa, the city lights a blur through her tear-filled eyes. She was alone, humiliated, and invisible. At 40, her life felt like it was already over. On her coffee table, nestled between a stack of bills and a library book, sat a thick, cream-colored envelope with an embossed return address, Finch and Sterling, LLP. She had glanced at it earlier, assuming it was a solicitation, and had tossed it aside. Tonight she was too broken to even care. The morning after the gala was a study in gray. A dull, persistent drizzle wept against Amelia's apartment window, mirroring the hollow ache in her chest. The memory of Julian's smug smile and Tiffany's radiant youth was a fresh wound. She felt irrelevant, a footnote in the grand story of Julian Vance's success. She forced herself to make coffee, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in a sea of despair. Her life was now a loop of chasing invoices, pitching for small restoration projects on historic homes, and fighting the creeping dread that she had sacrificed her best years for a man who now looked at her like a stranger. As the coffee maker gurgled, her eyes fell on the envelope again. Finch and Sterling, LLP. The name was vaguely familiar, like something from an old movie. It felt solid, permanent, a stark contrast to the flimsy, transient nature of her current life. Curiosity, a feeling she hadn't experienced in months, finally pricked through her apathy. She picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. It wasn't junk mail. With a tremor of apprehension, she slid it open with a kitchen knife. The letter inside was typed on the same luxurious paper, the words formal and stark. Dear Ms. Amelia Hayes, this correspondence is to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle, Mr. Arthur Blackwood. We, the firm of Finch & Sterling, are the executors of Mr. Blackwood's estate. It is imperative that you contact our offices at your earliest convenience to schedule a meeting with our senior partner, Mr. Alistair Finch, regarding the reading and execution of Mr. Blackwood's last will and testament. Please be advised that your presence is a matter of significant urgency. Amelia sank into a kitchen chair, the letter trembling in her hand. Arthur Blackwood. She hadn't heard that name in decades. He was her grandmother's brother, a reclusive, almost mythical figure from her childhood. She remembered meeting him once at a family funeral when she was about 10. He had been a tall, severe-looking man with piercing blue eyes who didn't say much. He had given her a beautifully illustrated leather-bound copy of The Secret Garden and told her, "Always tend to the things others neglect. That's where the real beauty is." Her family had lost touch with him years ago. They said he was eccentric, a wealthy investor who lived a quiet life somewhere in New England after making a fortune in the early days of computing and then in shrewd long-term investments. They considered him a recluse who wanted nothing to do with them. Why would he name her in his will? And what did significant urgency mean? She probably inherited a dusty old clock or set of books. Still, it was a distraction, a mystery. She found the number on the letterhead and dialed, half expecting a recording. A crisp, human voice answered immediately. "Finch & Sterling, how may I direct your call?" "Hello, my name is Amelia Hayes. I received a letter about Mr. Arthur Blackwood." The change in the receptionist's tone was immediate. The polite efficiency warmed into something resembling reverence. "Ms. Hayes, of course. Mr. Finch has been anticipating your call. He can see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock if that is amenable." It felt like being pulled into another world. "Yes, 10 o'clock is fine." The next morning, Amelia stood before a formidable limestone building in the heart of the financial district. The brass plaque read, Finch & Sterling Est, 1922. It was a world away from Julian's sleek glass and steel tech empire. This place spoke of old money, of legacies that spanned generations. Inside the office was a cathedral of mahogany and leather. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner. A young paralegal escorted her to a corner office with a sweeping view of the city. Alistair Finch rose from behind a massive desk. He was a man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and the same kind of piercing blue eyes she remembered from her great-uncle. He was impeccably dressed in a three-piece tweed suit. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice a low, comforting baritone. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I am Alistair Finch. I was your great-uncle's lawyer, and I was also his friend." He gestured for her to sit in a plush leather armchair. He didn't engage in small talk. He slid a heavy document bound in a blue cover across the desk. "Amelia," he began, his tone softening. "Arthur was a very private man. He didn't maintain many family ties, but he did observe. He was aware of your life, your career choices, and your recent difficulties." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "He knew about my divorce. He knew you were a woman of substance and integrity who had been dealt a severe injustice," Finch corrected gently. "He admired your passion for restoration. He often said you were the only one in the family who understood the value of preserving the past. He saw your work not as a hobby, but as a calling." Finch paused, letting the words sink in. "Arthur never married and had no children. He spent his life building a considerable fortune, and he was very particular about what would happen to it after his passing. He wanted his legacy to be in the hands of someone who would nurture it, not squander it. Someone who tends to the things others neglect." He tapped the document. This is his last will and testament. It is quite straightforward. He has left a few small bequests to various charities and his longtime staff. The remainder, the entirety of the Blackwood estate, he has left to you. Amelia stared at him confused. The remainder. What does that mean? His house. A few $1,000s? Alistair Finch looked at her, his expression a mixture of solemnity and something that looked like gentle pity for what she was about to experience. Amelia, he said slowly, choosing his words with care. Arthur Blackwood was not simply a wealthy man. By the time of his passing, his portfolio of investments, real estate holdings, and private equity stakes were valued at an estimated $2.7 billion. The number hung in the silent wood-paneled office like a ghost. $2.7 billion. Amelia heard the words, but her brain refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. It was a sum so vast, so astronomical, that it felt like a clerical error. A joke. She looked at Alistair Finch, expecting him to crack a smile to tell her he'd misspoken. But his face was earnest, his blue eyes unwavering. I'm sorry, she stammered, the room suddenly feeling too warm. I think I must have misheard you. Did you say billion? Yes, Ms. Hayes, with a B. Finch confirmed, his voice calm and steady, a rock in her swirling sea of disbelief. It is a significant fortune, and it is now yours. He gestured to the document on the desk. Of course it's more complex than just a number. The Blackwood estate comprises a diversified portfolio of stocks in blue-chip companies, controlling interests in several private technology and green energy firms, a collection of priceless art and antiques, and significant real estate holdings. He slid a second, thicker file towards her. It was a preliminary asset summary. She opened it numbly. The words swam before her eyes. The Blackwood Manor, a 200-acre estate in Vermont. A historic brownstone on the Upper East Side, New York City. A vineyard in Napa Valley. A penthouse apartment in London overlooking Hyde Park. A villa on the coast of Italy. It was an inventory for a life she couldn't even imagine. Just last week, her biggest financial concern had been whether she could afford to have the sputtering engine of her 10-year-old Honda Civic looked at. Now she owned a vineyard. Why? The word escaped her as a hoarse whisper. Why me? He barely knew me. He knew more than you think, Finch replied, leaning forward. Arthur was a man who valued character above all else. He loathed the new brand of ostentatious hollow wealth. He saw your ex-husband Julian as the embodiment of that world, all flash, no foundation. He saw how you poured your soul into building his dream only to be discarded when he achieved it. Finch opened a drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was of Amelia years ago, smiling, her face smudged with plaster dust as she worked on restoring a historic church fresco. He kept this, Finch said softly. A relative sent it to him. He told me, look at her. She creates value. She finds beauty in what is broken and makes it whole again. Her husband sells pixels and empty promises. She restores history. He watched your struggles after the divorce, how you started your own small business with dignity, refusing to be broken. He saw in you the same quiet strength and appreciation for lasting value that he prided himself on. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. For years, Julian had made her feel small, as if her passion was a quaint little hobby compared to his world-changing ambitions. But this quiet, distant man had seen her. He had truly seen her. There are, of course, stipulations. Finch continued, bringing her back to the present. He established the Blackwood Foundation, a charitable trust to be funded by a portion of the estate's annual earnings. He has named you as the chairperson. Its mandate is broad: the preservation of historical architecture and the support of traditional artisans. It was his final gift to you, not just the wealth, but a purpose for it that aligns with your own soul. He pushed a pen across the desk. There are many documents to be signed. This first set is the most important. They are the acceptance forms officially transferring executorship of the estate to you. Once you sign these, the process begins. The assets will be transferred into a trust under your name. You will become, for all intents and purposes, one of the wealthiest women in the country." Amelia stared at the pen, then at the signature line waiting for her. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. She thought of the gala, of Julian's cruel dismissive eyes, of Tiffany's blinding diamonds, of Beatrice Albright's pitying sneer. She thought of the condescending tone of Julian's lawyers as they'd picked apart her life, valuing her contribution to a decade-long marriage at a mere pittance. This signature was not just a legal act, it was an act of rebellion. It was the closing of a chapter of humiliation and the opening of one of unimaginable power. Her ex-wife, the one he'd cast aside as a failure, the tired-looking woman in the borrowed dress, was about to become infinitely more powerful than he could ever dream of being. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs with a newfound strength. Her hand was steady now. The pen felt solid and real. With a firm, deliberate stroke, she signed her name, Amelia Hayes. The ink was black and final. The sound of the pen scratching against the heavy paper was the only noise in the room. It was the sound of a world shifting on its axis. Finch smiled a genuine warm expression. "Welcome to your new life, Ms. Hayes. I believe we have a great deal of work to do." The days following the signing were a blur of meetings, legal jargon, and staggering numbers. Amelia felt like she was learning a new language, the language of wealth. Portfolio managers, tax attorneys, and security consultants moved in and out of Alistair Finch's office, all treating her with a deferential respect that was both unnerving and deeply satisfying. Her first act wasn't one of revenge or extravagance. It was one of quiet reclamation. She called the bank that held the mortgage on her parents' old home, a beautiful Victorian house Julian had insisted they sell during the divorce, to liquidate shared assets, a sale that had broken her heart. She learned it was back on the market. "I'd like to make an offer," she told the real estate agent, her voice even. "We have several competitive offers already, ma'am," the agent said dismissively. "I'll pay cash," Amelia said simply. 20% above the asking price, and I want the sale closed by the end of the week." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. By Friday, the keys to her childhood home were in her hand. Walking through the empty rooms, tracing the patterns on the stained glass windows, she felt a piece of her soul click back into place. This was real. Her next move was for her business. She had been operating Hayes Restorations out of her small apartment, struggling to compete for minor jobs. Now she instructed one of her new financial advisors to lease the entire top floor of a historic brick building downtown. She hired a small expert team of artisans she had long admired but could never afford, offering them salaries and benefits that made their jaws drop. She wasn't just restarting her business, she was building an institution. Amelia herself began to change. The perpetual anxiety that had hunched her shoulders began to dissipate. She bought new clothes, not flashy designer labels, but beautifully tailored pieces from classic, understated brands that made her feel confident and poised. She started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. The weight of her new responsibilities was immense, but it was a purposeful weight, unlike the crushing, pointless weight of Julian's betrayal. Alistair Finch became her guide and confidant. He shared stories of Arthur Blackwood, painting a picture of a brilliant, principled man who had found the noise of modern society distasteful. He believed money was a tool, not a scorecard, Alistair explained over lunch one day. He saw Julian on the cover of a business magazine and told me, "That man is a high-stakes gambler playing with other people's money. He builds nothing that lasts." He would be so pleased with what you're doing, Amelia. Buying back your family home, building your business from the ground up. You're putting down roots, not just flying at altitude. The news of a mystery heiress inheriting the legendary Blackwood fortune began to ripple through the financial world. At first, it was just whispers on Wall Street blind items and gossip columns. No one knew her name, only that she was a long-lost relative who had suddenly become a major player. The secrecy was a deliberate strategy by Finch to give Amelia time to acclimate. But in a world connected by whispers and data, secrets never last. Julian Vance was on top of the world. His company, Innovate, was preparing for a new round of funding that would skyrocket its valuation. He and Tiffany were the darlings of the tech and social scenes, their every move documented by paparazzi and envious bloggers. He hadn't thought about Amelia in months, except for the fleeting, satisfying memory of her pained face at the gala. She was a relic of his past, a necessary stepping stone he had climbed over and forgotten. He first heard the rumor at his exclusive club. A group of venture capitalists were discussing the Blackwood estate. "Can you believe it? Arthur Blackwood was sitting on nearly $3 billion, one said, and he left it all to some unknown niece or something. No one knows who she is." "Finch and Sterling have her locked down tight," another added. "But whoever she is, she just became one of the biggest private equity players overnight. The Blackwood portfolio has kingmaker-level stakes in a dozen industries." Julian was intrigued but detached. It was just another story of old money changing hands. A week later, however, a financial journalist he knew called him for a comment. "Julian, I'm working on a piece about the Blackwood heiress," the journalist said. "We're trying to confirm her identity. Our sources say she's a relative from his estranged sister's side. The family name is Hayes." The name hit Julian like a punch to the gut. Hayes. It couldn't be. He forced a laugh. "Hayes is a common name. Good luck with that." But the seed of a terrifying, exhilarating idea had been planted. He spent the rest of the day in a cold sweat, his mind racing. Amelia. His mousy, defeated Amelia, inheriting a fortune that dwarfed his own. It was impossible. It was absurd. He hired a private investigator, sparing no expense. "Find out who inherited Arthur Blackwood's money. I need to know everything." The report came back in less than 48 hours. It was a single page with a recent photograph attached. The photo showed Amelia walking out of the Finch and Sterling building. She looked different. Her hair was styled, her posture was erect, and she wore a camel hair coat that screamed quiet luxury. She looked powerful. The report was blunt. Amelia Hayes, 40, architectural restorer, is the sole beneficiary of the Blackwood estate. Estimated net worth $2.7 billion. Julian stared at the report, his world tilting on its axis. He wasn't filled with happiness for her or even simple shock. He was consumed by a blinding, furious wave of possessiveness. His ex-wife, his mousy little Amelia, was a billionaire. The money, the power, the connections, they should have been his. He had been married to her. He was entitled to it. His mind began to spin, the gears of his manipulative charm grinding into motion. He hadn't just made a mistake divorcing her. He had made a cataclysmic financial blunder. That evening, Tiffany was showing him a new haul from a shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. "Look, Julie, it's the new Birkin. There was a 6-month wait list, but the manager knows me, so—" Julian barely heard her. He looked at her, at the designer bag, at the vapid, smiling face, and for the first time he saw her not as a trophy, but as a liability. A very, very expensive liability. "Tiffany," he said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." He saw the future clearly now. He hadn't lost a wife. He had lost a winning lottery ticket. And he was going to do whatever it took to get it back. His new plan began to form a venomous, calculated strategy to win back Amelia's trust, and with it, her fortune. Amelia was overseeing the final touches on the restoration of a historic library's reading room, a project funded by the newly established Blackwood Foundation, when her assistant approached her looking flustered. "Ms. Hayes," she said hesitantly, "there's a Mr. Vance here to see you. He says it's personal." Amelia felt a cold dread snake up her spine. Julian. Here. She hadn't seen or spoken to him since the gala. She considered refusing, but a new steely resolve had taken root in her heart. She wasn't the scared, broken woman from the Astoria ballroom anymore. "Send him in," she said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. Julian walked into the vast, sun-drenched room, the scent of his expensive cologne, a jarring intrusion among the familiar smells of old wood and lemon oil. He had a carefully curated look of contrition on his face. He was holding a bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers he used to buy her after a fight. The gesture was so transparently manipulative it was almost laughable. "Ames!" He began, his voice a low, intimate murmur he had once used to such devastating effect. "You look incredible. Truly." "What do you want, Julian?" Amelia asked, her tone flat. She didn't invite him to sit. She stood her ground, a faint dusting of plaster on her blazer, a symbol of her new world. "I came to apologize," he said, taking a step closer. She didn't move back. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about what I lost. The gala, seeing you there. It made me realize what a fool I've been. I was drowning in the pressure, the expectations. I lost my way. I lost you." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Every word was designed to tug at old heartstrings, to evoke a shared history he had so casually incinerated. "You didn't lose me, Julian," Amelia stated calmly. "You threw me away. There's a difference." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "That's not fair, Ames. We were a team. I always said that. And I know the divorce was messy. I let the lawyers get out of control. But in my heart, I never stopped caring about you." He glanced around the magnificent room. "And look at you now. I heard about your inheritance. I am so happy for you. You deserve it. You always deserve the world." Then came the pivot, the true purpose of his visit. "I just feel like that kind of wealth, that power. It comes with sharks, Ames. People will try to take advantage of you. You need someone you can trust, someone who knows that world, someone who has your back." He paused, his eyes pleading. "I want to be that person. Let me help you. Help. We can be a team again, stronger than ever." Amelia looked at him. Truly. Looked at him, and for the first time she felt nothing. No pain, no lingering affection, only a profound and chilling clarity. She saw the predator beneath the polished veneer, the avarice glittering in his eyes. He wasn't here for her. He was here for the Blackwood estate. He was hunting. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It wasn't a smile of warmth, but of power. "No, thank you, Julian," she said, her voice as cool and clear as glass. "No." He seemed genuinely shocked, as if this outcome had never entered his calculations. "No," she repeated. "You're right about one thing. This kind of wealth attracts sharks, and I'm looking at the most dangerous one right now. You don't care about me. You care about what I have. You smell money and you came running just like you always do." His mask of contrition shattered, replaced by a flash of his familiar arrogant anger. "That's ridiculous. After everything I did for you. Everything you did." Amelia cut him off, a spark of fire in her voice now. "Let me remind you, Julian, I was the one who worked 2 jobs while you wrote your business plan. I was the one whose savings were your seed money. I was the one who gave up my own career to support yours. You didn't build your empire alone. You built it on my back. And the moment it was stable, you replaced me." From the arched doorway behind Julian a figure appeared. It was Tiffany. She looked pale and uncertain, her usual bubbly confidence completely gone. She had clearly followed him. "Julie," she asked, her voice small, "what's going on?" Julian spun around, his face a mask of fury at being interrupted. But Amelia's eyes were locked on Tiffany. She didn't see a rival anymore. She saw a young woman standing exactly where she had stood years ago, oblivious to the true nature of the man she was with. Amelia spoke directly to Tiffany, her voice softening with a touch of pity. "He's telling me how much he misses me, how we were a team, how he wants to help me manage my newfound fortune." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Is that what he told you when he left me for you, that we were a team?" Tiffany's face crumpled. The illusion was broken. She looked at Julian at his angry, cornered expression and then back at Amelia's calm, powerful stance. For the first time, Tiffany understood. She wasn't the victor. She was just the next victim. "Julian," Amelia said, her voice now sharp with finality, turning her attention back to him. "Our business is concluded. I have my life back, a life you have no part in. Please see yourself out. And take your lilies with you. They always made me sneeze." Defeated and exposed, Julian Vance stood there, stripped of his charm and his power. He grabbed a stunned Tiffany by the arm and stormed out of the library, leaving only the cloying scent of his cologne and the discarded bouquet of lilies on the floor. Amelia watched them go, not with triumph, but with the quiet, profound peace of a battle finally won. In the year that followed, the world learned Amelia Hayes's name. But she wasn't on the covers of tabloids or featured in society columns. Instead, she was in architectural digests and philanthropy journals. The Blackwood Foundation became a formidable force for good, saving dozens of historic buildings from the wrecking ball and creating apprenticeship programs that breathed new life into dying arts, like stonemasonry, stained glass restoration, and traditional carpentry. Amelia found her purpose not in spending her fortune but in investing it. She traveled not to lavish resorts, but to crumbling castles in Scotland and decaying palazzos in Venice, directing her teams with an expert eye and a quiet passion that earned her global respect. She was no longer Julian Vance's ex-wife. She was the guardian of Arthur Blackwood's legacy and the creator of her own. The news about Julian came in fragmented reports. His grand funding round for Innovate had fallen through. The whispers started that his company's valuation was wildly inflated, a house of cards built on hype and projected earnings that never materialized. His reputation as a visionary began to tarnish. He was seen as reckless a gambler. The investors who had once clamored for a piece of his company now ran for the exits. Tiffany left him her departure announced in a short, terse post on Instagram that spoke of seeking authenticity. The divorce was swift and public, with Tiffany's lawyers ensuring she got her share before the entire empire crumbled. The final blow came 6 months later. Innovate filed for bankruptcy. The sleek headquarters was shuttered, the employees laid off. Julian Vance, the man who had graced the cover of magazines, the titan of tech, was ruined. He was last seen moving out of a rented condo, his custom suits replaced by worn jeans, his face etched with a bitterness that had aged him a decade. He had squandered everything in his pursuit of more. One crisp autumn afternoon, Amelia was standing on the scaffolding of a centuries-old theater her foundation was restoring. The city skyline stretched out before her, a testament to ambition and change. She looked down at her hands, no longer soft and manicured, but strong and capable, often smudged with the honest dirt of her work. Alistair Finch stood beside her. "Quite a view," he commented. "Yes," Amelia agreed. "It is." "I received a letter this morning," Alistair said casually, "from Julian Vance's bankruptcy lawyer. A desperate last-ditch inquiry. They were trying to make a legal claim that as his ex-wife, a portion of your inheritance could be considered a marital asset." Amelia didn't even turn. She just smiled faintly. "And what did you tell them, Alistair?" "I told them," he said with a chuckle, "that Mr. Vance had already settled his claim on your life and that the valuation he agreed to at the time was final. I believe the legal term I used was profoundly and irrevocably mistaken." They shared a quiet laugh. The sound echoed in the vast empty theater that would soon be filled with life again. Julian was no longer a shadow in her life. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale. He had spent his life building things that were designed to be replaced Kodak's public image. She was building things that were meant to last for centuries. She had learned the lesson her great-uncle Arthur had tried to teach her all those years ago when he'd handed her that book. The real treasures are not the things that glitter, but the things that endure. And in restoring the neglected beauty of the past, Amelia Hayes had finally and completely restored herself. Life for Amelia had settled into a rhythm of profound purpose. She split her time between the bustling headquarters of the Blackwood Foundation in New York and the various restoration sites she personally oversaw across the country. She was no longer a subject of pity or gossip, but a respected figure in the worlds of philanthropy and historical preservation. The name Amelia Hayes now stood for something solid, enduring, and graceful. The ghost of Julian Vance had, she believed, been fully exorcised. She was at the reopening ceremony of a magnificent 1920s Art Deco theater in Chicago, a project the foundation had saved from demolition. Standing at the podium addressing a crowd of city officials, donors, and journalists, she felt a sense of peace. She spoke of the theater not as a building of brick and mortar, but as a vessel of community memory, a place where generations had shared dreams in the flickering dark. The applause was thunderous and genuine. It was later that evening in her hotel suite that the echo of her past returned, not as a whisper but as a belligerent shout. Alistair Finch called his usually calm voice tight with controlled anger. "Amelia, I'm sorry to disturb your evening," he began, "but there's something you need to see. It's going to be all over the internet by morning." He sent her a link to an online tabloid, a notorious publication known for its sensationalism. The headline splashed in lurid yellow and black read, "Jilted Husband Tells All. How My Ex-Wife Billionaire Heiress Amelia Hayes Schemed to Steal a Dying Man's Fortune." Beneath it was a professionally shot photograph of Julian. He looked thinner, his face artfully arranged into an expression of weary victimhood. The article was a masterpiece of malicious fiction woven with just enough half-truth to seem plausible to the uninformed. Julian claimed their marriage had fallen apart because of Amelia's unhealthy obsession with her reclusive elderly great-uncle. He painted her not as a dedicated artist, but as a cunning social climber who, seeing her husband's star rise, decided to aim for an even bigger prize. She would visit him in secret, one fabricated quote read. She'd come back and talk about the Blackwood legacy, about how I, a new money tech guy, could never understand true class. She poisoned the old man against me, preying on his isolation and his failing health. She painted me as a monster so she could position herself as his savior. Our divorce wasn't about another woman. It was about her cold, calculated ambition. I didn't leave her. She had already left our marriage for a dying man's checkbook. He even twisted her love for restoration. She was always obsessed with old things. Broken things, he was quoted as saying. I think she saw Arthur Blackwood as her ultimate restoration project with a multi-billion-dollar payout. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. It was a vile, poisonous narrative that struck at the very heart of her identity and the honor of the man who had saved her. Julian couldn't attack her wealth, so he was attacking her character. He was trying to defile the one thing he could never touch, the genuine, quiet respect between her and her great-uncle. The fallout was immediate. The story was picked up by more mainstream gossip blogs. The comment sections were a cesspool of judgment. Knew there was more to the story, one read. Classic gold digger, said another. By the next day, the whispers had reached her professional life. A board member of a museum she was collaborating with called for a brief pause to allow the dust to settle. A journalist who had been glowing in his praise the night before now asked for a comment on the troubling allegations. Julian had found her vulnerability. She had built a fortress of wealth and purpose, but he was attacking its foundations with lies. He was trying to turn her inheritance, a gift of validation, into a mark of shame. Alistair Finch advised a course of dignified silence. It's a tabloid, Amelia. To respond is to give it legitimacy. It will blow over. For a day she tried to take his advice, but the slander festered. Julian wasn't just attacking her. He was desecrating the memory of Arthur Blackwood, painting a kind, principled, and intensely sharp-minded man as a senile puppet. She thought of Arthur's piercing blue eyes, of his one piece of advice to her as a child, always tend to the things others neglect. Julian was trying to neglect his memory to break his legacy. She would not allow it. "No, Alistair," she said on the phone the following evening, her voice ringing with a newfound cold fury. "I will not be silent while he exhumes a good man's name for his own pathetic revenge. This isn't about me. It's about Arthur. I am not going to let these lies be the final word on his story." "A libel suit would be long and messy," Alistair warned. "It's exactly the circus he wants." "I know," Amelia said, a plan beginning to form in her mind, a plan that felt true to both herself and her benefactor. "I'm not going to sue him. I'm going to bury him. Not with lawyers, but with the truth. I'm going to the Blackwood Manor in Vermont. I need to find something in Arthur's own words." She had managed the estate from a distance, preserving the house as a private memorial. She had never felt ready to step fully into his personal space. But now she wasn't just his heiress. She was his defender, and she was going into the heart of his world to find the weapon she needed. The Blackwood Manor was not a palace of ostentatious wealth, but a grand sprawling stone house, nestled among ancient maple and oak trees in the Vermont countryside. It was dignified, private, and timeless, much like the man who had lived there. As Amelia drove up the long gravel driveway, she felt a sense of coming home to a place she'd never been. The house was kept in perfect order by a small, loyal staff who had served Arthur for decades. The housekeeper, a warm, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, greeted her with tears in her eyes. "He would be so proud of you, Ms. Hayes. What that man is saying in the papers, it's a wicked sin." Amelia spent the first day simply walking through the rooms, absorbing the quiet atmosphere. The house was filled with books, maps, and art that spoke of a curious and brilliant mind. There was nothing flashy or ostentatious. It was the home of a man who valued substance above all. His study was her final destination. It was a magnificent two-story room lined wall to wall with books. A large oak desk stood before a bay window that overlooked the rolling hills. It felt like a sanctuary. This was the mind of Arthur Blackwood. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. A letter. A misplaced document. She ran her hand along the spines of his books, feeling a connection to him she never had in life. For hours she searched. Finally, Mrs. Gable brought her a cup of tea. "If you're looking for the heart of him, miss," the housekeeper said softly, "it wouldn't be out in the open. He was a very private man. He had a safe behind the Emerson volumes." She pointed to a section of the bookshelf. Behind a row of leather-bound Ralph Waldo Emerson essays, Amelia found a small, discreet wall safe. The combination, Mrs. Gable told her, was the date of the Battle of Hastings, 1066. Inside there were no gold bars or bearer bonds. Instead, there was a stack of about a dozen thick leather-bound journals. They were filled cover to cover with Arthur Blackwood's elegant, precise handwriting dating back nearly 50 years. Amelia sat at his desk and opened the most recent one. She began to read, and as she did, the quiet, observant man came to life. He wrote about the stock market, about politics, about bird-watching, and about books. And then she found what she was looking for. She found herself. October 14th, 2015. Had a call from my grandniece Amelia, her wedding invitation. The man is Julian Vance. I looked him up. All flash, no fire. He sells digital ephemera and calls himself a visionary. A man with a salesman's smile and an empty soul. He will build his success, and when he feels it is complete, he will discard the scaffolding. I worry for her. She has a good heart, a creator's spirit. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. He had seen it from the very beginning. She kept reading, flipping through the years. June 22, 2023. News that Julian Vance has left Amelia for a younger woman. Unsurprising. A man like that only values appreciating assets, and he is too foolish to understand that character and loyalty appreciate more than youth. He failed to realize his wife was his greatest asset. I see from her public filings she has started a small restoration business. Good. Steel is forged in fire. She has the Blackwood resilience. Tears streamed down Amelia's face. He had been watching over her, respecting her struggle from afar. Then she found the final entries written in a slightly shakier hand just months before he passed. February 5th, 2025. Alistair is concerned about my will. He suggests a competency evaluation to head off any potential challenges. Amusing. My mind is as clear as a Vermont winter morning. I know precisely what I am doing. This fortune is a responsibility, a tool. It needs a caretaker, not a showman. It needs someone who tends to the things that last. It needs Amelia. She will not be corrupted by it. She will give it purpose. She will understand. This was it. This was the truth. It was more powerful than any legal argument or public relations statement. It was Arthur's voice, clear and unassailable from beyond the grave. The next week, Amelia did something she had never done before. She agreed to a live exclusive interview with Diana Sterling, a respected journalist known for her tough but fair approach. The nation, intrigued by the scandal, tuned in. Diana began with the allegations. Amelia, your ex-husband Julian Vance claims you manipulated a vulnerable elderly man to secure your inheritance. What is your response? Amelia was poised and calm. Julian is a gifted storyteller. She began, her voice steady. He has built a compelling story of his own victimhood. But it's just that, a story. The truth is quieter, but it is far more powerful. I did not know my great-uncle well in person, but I have come to know him through his words, and I would like to share them with you. She opened a folder, and with the camera in tight focus, she read the entries from Arthur Blackwood's journals. She read his initial assessment of Julian, his quiet pride in her resilience after the divorce, and his final clear-eyed reasoning for making her his heir. There was a stunned silence in the studio when she finished. Her voice was thick with emotion, but she did not break. That is the man Julian Vance calls a senile puppet, she said softly. A man who saw through him a decade ago. My great-uncle's legacy is not just his fortune. It is his wisdom and his integrity. I am not its owner. I am its caretaker. And I will not allow a desperate, cruel man to tarnish his memory for a fleeting moment of public attention. The effect was devastating. Julian wasn't just defeated. He was annihilated, exposed as a petty, vindictive liar by the words of the very man he had tried to slander. The public tide turned instantly and ferociously against him. He became a pariah, a joke. No one would fund him. No one would hire him. No one would even take his calls. He vanished from public life utterly and finally disgraced. Amelia stood on the porch of the Blackwood Manor a few weeks later, looking out at the fiery colors of the Vermont autumn. The journals were safe. Her great-uncle's name was cleared, and her future was her own. She was no longer a restorer of buildings, but a restorer of legacies, his and now hers. The echoes of her past were silent at last, replaced by the quiet, promising rustle of the turning leaves. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can be the foundation for our greatest triumphs. It's a testament to the idea that true worth isn't measured by the person on your arm or the balance in your bank account, but by the integrity in your heart and the purpose you build with your own two hands. She was discarded, humiliated, and left with nothing, but she never lost herself. And when the world turned, she didn't choose revenge. She chose to build a legacy of beauty and strength. Her journey teaches us that the ultimate victory is not just being proven right, but living a life so full and meaningful that the past simply has no power over you anymore. If you were moved by Amelia's incredible journey from heartbreak to empowerment, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that their best days are still ahead. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of real-life twists, resilience, and the sweet, unexpected taste of justice. Thank you for listening. Thank you.